What's going on, adventurers? My name's Travis and welcome back to another project. In today's video, I'm going to be taking you through all the steps on how to clean and refill a Corney keg. If you haven't been following along with our series, over the winter my wife and I built this really awesome Kegerator cabinet. It's been working well over the past couple months and we've already got one keg through the taps. Like all good things, that keg had to come to an end, but we're gonna get it refilled and back running. Behind me here, I've got a batch of blonde ale that's been fermenting for just over 2 weeks, so we're gonna get that into the keg. So let's jump into this project. First order of business, we have to get our keg disconnected from the CO2 and beer lines. First thing we wanna do is make sure that our gas is turned all the way off. Once that's done, we can disconnect our beer and gas lines. These ball lock lines are pretty easy to disconnect. You just have to pull up this little collar here. Now that we've got the lines disconnected, we can lift it out of the kegerator. Before we start opening this keg, we want to make sure that we release all the pressure. Since it was hooked up to CO2, there should still be some pressure in this tank. To do this, pull up on the pressure relief valve at the top of the lid. When no more CO2 is released, this keg is ready to open. To remove the lid on these Corney kegs, you just lift up this little handle and it lifts free. It's pretty dark, but you can see all the way at the bottom there's quite a bit of trub left over from the last batch. Before I take off the fittings, I'm gonna quickly give this a quick swish, get the bulk of the stuff out of it. That way I won't be sloshing stuff around with the openings from the fittings. To remove the fittings, all you need is an adjustable wrench. Before you fully remove the fittings, it's a good idea to take note. So the inline, which is the gas, has these little notches in here. The outline doesn't have those. They look similar, but they won't connect correctly if you put them in backwards. Now that the fittings are out, you want to make sure to clean the keg inside, make sure that there's no leftover trub from the last batch. I have this long-handled brush, really makes it easy to get down to the bottom of the keg, but a cloth works just the same. Nice and clean. Now that the keg is clean, we need to sanitize it. I'm going to use this Star San sanitizer. This stuff is awesome. It's an acid sanitizer, so you just need to make sure you follow the directions on the bottle. There's certain ratios, so 1/2 ounce to 2.5 gallons of water. That's what we're going to do. It'll make sure that everything is nice and sanitary. It's important to measure the correct amount of water to put in with the Star Sans. This is an acid sanitizer and only works with the proper ratios. It's nice because once you're done with it, you dump it out and then you can put the beer right into the keg afterwards. There's no rinsing or anything like that. So I'm just using this measuring cup to measure out 2.5 gallons of water. Now that I've got my 2.5 gallons, I'm going to put in 1/2 ounce of Star Sans. It doesn't really matter what order you do your sanitizing in, just as long as you sanitize everything that's going to be touching your beer. So we need to sanitize our keg, all of our fittings and dip tube that go with our keg, as well as our siphoning equipment that we're going to be using to siphon our beer into our keg. What I like to do is siphon some of the star sands out of our keg into the sink and then put all of our fittings and everything in there and sanitize that. Then we can reattach all the fittings, close everything up, and then we can slosh the keg around while it's closed to sanitize the keg. For your dip tube, you can take the siphon hose and run some of the star sands through the dip tube to make sure the inside is sanitized. So this sanitizer doesn't take too long. It only takes about 30 seconds of contact, so you just want to make sure all the surfaces are nice and covered. I left about half of the star sands in the keg here, so we're going to reassemble this and then slosh that around to make sure this is all nice and sanitized. So you can see the two different posts here. One has these notches, the other one doesn't. So the one with the notches is your gas line, and that goes on your in post. So first you put the poppet in, make sure that is seated nice, then the spring, and then the gas fitting here. Now for the outline, very similar, just the poppet, spring, but instead now we're going to use this dip tube. So just push that all the way down. There's a small cup at the very bottom of the keg. You want to make sure the dip tube is sitting in that. Now we'll replace the lid. So just put the O-ring around. Now that all the fittings are back on, we can slosh the star sands around in the keg to sanitize it. Don't worry if there's a little bit of foam in your keg, that's okay. You can pour your beer right on top of it. So this is our homebrew that we're going to be racking into our keg. About 2 days ago, I moved this out from inside the house into the garage where it's quite a bit cooler. The reason you want to do this when you're kegging your beer is as soon as it goes into the refrigerator at that 3 degrees Celsius, all that yeast is going to settle to the bottom of your keg. The more yeast that's at the bottom of your keg, each time you pour a beer, it'll suck some of that yeast in and make it cloudy. So the more yeast you can get to settle out before you put it in the keg, the better. I've got our sanitized racking cane here, so we're going to drain our homebrew into our keg sitting on the floor. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that the bottom of your racking cane is sitting at the bottom of your keg. That way the beer isn't splashing and oxidizing. If your beer oxidizes too much, it'll go stale early. So the keg is completely full now. You can see some of the foam at the top. That's just some of the residual Star Sands foam that's left over. It's totally okay to leave it in there. It won't affect the taste of your beer. So I've got the keg set back in the kegerator. We're gonna hook up the gas line and force carbonate it. To force carbonate your beer, you want to turn your regulator up to about 30 psi and then leave it for about 24 to 36 hours. This extra pressure in the headspace of the keg will push more CO2 into the beer and carbonate it faster. Once that's done, you can turn it down to your serving pressure. For us, it's about 11 psi and start pouring beer. So once the gas line's hooked up, you want to make sure you purge your keg. That'll just get all the extra oxygen and replace it with CO2. Now we can close up the kegerator and let it carbonate overnight. The beer is sat for a couple days at 30 psi and is now fully carbonated. I turned the pressure on our regulator down to 10 psi, which is a good serving pressure. Before I poured my first test beer, I made sure to release the pressure in the keg. The reason you want to do this is you still have that 30 psi in that Corney keg, so even though the regulator's set lower, if you tried to pour, it would just blow a bunch of foam at you. Now that this beer is fully carbonated, I can leave it at our serving pressure and it will only improve as it sits in the fridge. With the cool temperatures, all that particulate, some of the yeast and stuff that's still floating in the beer will start to hibernate and settle to the bottom, and it will just continue to clarify. So I hope you've enjoyed this video walking you through how to clean and refill your Corney keg for your kegerator system. If you haven't checked out our other videos in our Kegerator cabinet series, I'll post a link here. We built this awesome Kegerator cabinet and got it fully operational. If you haven't already liked and subscribed, we'd really appreciate the support. And remember to comment below with any questions you have. So thanks for joining me today, and we hope to see you again real soon for another adventure project.